part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Season 3 of Producing While Asian. I'm Don Mike, your host, and today's conversation is with the incredible rogue ballerina, Georgina Pazcoguin. She has been on Broadway stages, she's been on New York City Ballet stage, and as a prima ballerina, she was the first AAPI prima ballerina of the New York City Ballet, and she was my fellow co-producer on Broadway's Here Lies Love, which as of this episode has garnered 4 Tony nominations for the 2024 competition. We talk about everything from representation to being in the room to being the only one in your community to be suddenly being in a room full of people just like you who are onlys in their communities, and also just the future of what we think could happen in the theater community and how capitalism may or may not be a friend to us in that whole process. So without any further intro, I'm not going to spoil anything because the conversation was so good. I now welcome Georgina Pazcoguin to Producing While Asian. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Hi, Georgina. Thank you for being part of Producing While Asian. How are you?
I'm fine, but where was the jingle? I thought we were gonna have like a little musical jingle.
that already happened. It's just you didn't hear it because we're so
Oh,
you'll
okay.
hear it. You'll hear it when you go back and listen to your episode. So there is a jingle. There's no words, but I wish there was. So I'm really glad you're here. And this whole month it's AANHPI, Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And the goal of my episodes in this month, which we rarely do every week, but because it is when it is, I decided to hit up our Here Lies Love producing fam and talk to everybody now that we're kind of at the tail end of the first kind of go around, the Broadway go around, kind of reflecting back on your experiences and what you thought. And now that we have these 4 Tony noms that are looking at us in the face, we do, talking about that. But I really want people to get to know the producers behind the historic cohort and who is in the room, and where you all came from, and that. So I just want to start there. Like, tell us your story. Like, where did you come from?
I come from a Filipino immigrant father who is a retired colonel in the army and an Italian mother, and I come from the ballet world. I grew up, my gift is dance. And so I spent 20 years at the New York City Ballet and am known as the Rogue Ballerina. That's my moniker. And I have created waves in that area of the world, that arena, the performing arts. I created a diversity initiative called Final Bow for Yellowface with my best friend and partner in change, Phil Chan. And that started in it started in 2017. And it was kind of like a result of me coming into my own as to what it like to be biracial, and also some of the experiences that I had in that predominantly white space. Ballet is a 400-year-old art form that started in the courts of Louis XIV. So that is, and it's also an art form that up until recent years hasn't really changed all that much. So, I mean, you are looking at me and I am looking at me, and I see, and I recognize, for those of you who are listening on the podcast, like, I am mixed race, white and Filipino. I walk through my world passing. And so that is my reality. And I am look the most like my mom out of my siblings. My siblings very much, they got the beautiful, beautiful olive skin tone, the brown, beautiful skin. And I am just a bit fairer, but also, like, I spent 20 years in a windowless theater, did not do much for my tan. And it was also something that when I first got into the company was frowned upon. I had to lean into the code switch, the white part of myself, and it started to feel very uncomfortable. And in my pursuit and in my journey to embrace the fullness that is my identity, it led me to recognizing my Filipino heritage and everything that my father has done, everything that our ancestors have done to make this life, this in America, possible. And kind of reckon with myself, and also understand the ceilings that I was charged to break in my own space. I am the first Asian American woman to ever have been promoted out of the corps de ballet of New York City Ballet. That might sound weird. Corps de ballet is like the large group of dancers. They are the unsung heroes of the ballet. So elevated out of the corps, which is to dance principal roles and solo roles. In the 75-year history, or I guess it was 70-year history when it happened, there was no other person that looked like me that was elevated as a ballerina. And
Mhm.
so that is something that I am very proud of. It didn't come without its costs. And I unpack that a lot in my book, Swan Dive, The Making of a Rogue Ballerina. And it's also the driving force as to what this moniker is. It's embracing what other people might see as something that holds you back or makes you different. I'm embracing the differences in me and promoting them and finding the gold that is that. So that's a little bit about me. And then last year, I'm coming up on the anniversary of my departure from New York City Ballet. I left City Ballet May 7th of
Yeah.
2023, and I secured being a co-producer of Here Lies Love on the 9th. So it was like
Amazing.
very much the last minute, and I wasn't sure if it was going to happen. 20
Yeah.
years, this has been my family. New York City Ballet has been my family, my experience, my only sole professional experience as like a home. Now I've done Broadway myself as a performer, but I've like gone in and out, but just like as a whole, this is a major part of my identity.
Yeah.
And I think it's so fortuitous that I was connected with you and in this cohort as like, what is the next chapter? And the mantras that I was saying to myself and the reflection that is needed was such a huge personal and professional change was like, I really want to connect more meaningfully with my Filipino heritage.
Amazing.
And for one reason or another, the universe put this opportunity in front of me, and it was a challenge that I was able to meet. Making a co-producer, I don't know if you've talked to your audience about that, but it's $250,000 one needs to
It's
raise to make.
yeah,
It's not
that's
nothing.
yeah, it's so exciting.
So that was an incredible feat in itself. And I think, I mean, we can talk about it later, but I think like fixing that ceiling, like that buy-in is something that we need to examine as,
Great.
producers and leaders in Broadway and theater owners. There are a lot of factors that go into that number, but also it was so important for me to be part of this Filipino cohort as a first myself. And you and I have talked about it. Like we have all been firsts in our spaces.
Right, right.
And to be met with other people who share that in all of the complicated nuances comes with, because it's with so much celebration, it comes with so many tears, so much frustration, so much like one step forward, three steps back, two steps forward, one pancake face on the ground, like failure. So that's a little bit about where I am and how I got to being a producer for Here Lies Love.
So tell us about that part. The when you like, how did the opportunity come up for you to accept the role of co-producer? Like, how did you get linked into the Here Lies Love boat after you resigned, or not resigned, but after you left from the ballet? How who was the conduit that brought you into our cohort?
Yeah, so the seed was planted earlier on in March. I am very, very close friends with Diana Demina. She's always been a mentor of mine. She was more so like being like, "Hey, you need to audition for the show." And she
Hmm,
like sent me like she's like, "Here's," and I did not see it at the public.
right.
But
Like a
then
lot
again,
of us.
yeah, I was like in a silo of the classical ballet. I was Balanchine and
Yeah.
uh, you know,
Not Annie B.
Bizet.
Parsons, like,
No, not so
in choreo.
much. But my eyes were open to this beautiful show talking about this incredible movement that it's what I love and what I love about myself and what I talk about a lot in my diversity master classes and in public speaking is how I find myself to be a perpetual student. And it was the learning about this movement, the people power revolution, and then also making the direct like comparisons to what's happening now in our country and how democracy is being impacted and how fragile democracy is.
Hmm.
And so it's always been a passionate thing. I think service is something that I'm very passionate about. So Diana was like, "Hey, you need to audition for this." And I was like, "I'm not a pop singer. I think I might be better served in a different capacity." And she was like, "Well, would you want to be a producer?" And I was like, "What does that mean?" And so
Right.
she was like, "Here, there's this amazing course. It's called Broadway 101. It's a 30-day course taught by younger producers who want to demystify the whole process. Because, like, I thought you had to have all of this money yourself. I am not a rich person. My family's not rich." And so, like, that is a misnomer. And so they like kind of like demystified the whole process. Broadway 101, I can get you the like actual stuff so you can post it so
For sure.
other people can know about it. So I took this course and I was like, I think I can do this. I like this. And Diane was like, okay, so let's talk in a bit. And that's kind of how I came into it. And then I was introduced to Jose, Antonio Vargas, and Clint Ramos. And we had a dinner and it was like I met brothers, long lost brothers.
Right.
And and so then it only further affirmed my resolve to be a part of this
Mhm.
because these minds and how they were thinking about the show, and as I was like bouncing my ideas, my thoughts, my concerns off of them, it was the first time in a long time, or maybe the first time ever, that in a professional sense, and was like, we see you, we hear you, we are thinking about this. And you have to give also credit to Diana as an ally and being the lead, one of the lead producers too, and being like, yes, this is something that we need to unpack and think differently from the first run of the public theater because we were in a completely different political space, societal space.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, the like feeling seen part, because I feel like you and me and probably a lot of our other cohort members felt the same because for a long time, I mean, the reason why this podcast exists, like for a long time, I'm like, yeah, I do what I do, but I don't know, like I've never felt the return of that being seen. Like I see other people, but like
Mhm.
I in terms of me and my culture and my experience, and even just questions like you were asking Jose and Clint at dinner, it hits different when somebody who has a shared background understands, and they don't even have to say I understand, you just know that they know. It's like kind of like Fight Club. It's like you don't talk about Fight Club. And so like that's really beautiful. Like that, that's probably, I would say, one of the more important reasons why this cohort should exist and why we came together, is because it's that feeling of knowing we're supported and that we're trying to achieve the same goal. And for a long time, because of the way society works, we've all been separated, achieving the same goals separately. And now, through the help of allies like Diana, we were able to come together and know that fact, and then be able to attack it as a team,
Yeah.
which I think was really helpful for us. And of course, it didn't mean we didn't hit challenges and things that would kind of still try to prevent us from achieving what we did. But yeah, it's just so different when you get to do it with people that look like you, that sound like you, that have shared experiences like you, and you know on a daily basis, like we did during the process. And it's not over yet. We're
Right.
still, so I think
I
just
mean,
that is over. So
the process of validation and also the experience of not having, like, listen, we all code switch in our
yeah,
day-to-day life. It's
absolutely.
like even like people who aren't mixed race or aren't Filipino or aren't of color, we all code switch. But to like take a break from like the major code switch that I have been doing for the past 20 years in my daily interactions, it just there's an ease
Yeah.
and what a refreshing moment to be like, and it's like you get a chance to like unpack some of like the, oh, I've been here and there's a different way of existing. And so I want to continue to seek that out. I think what some of the things that Here Lies Love did, and like in being very smart about the offerings that they offered people of color investing in the show and giving them a rate of return that benefited them, and that kind of also, reparations is not the right word, but that like valued them in the heritage that they brought and the expertise that they brought in trying to level a playing field that is predominantly still white. I think that is something we have not. talked about, and I think wasn't what specifically wasn't brought up in any press because it's just something that was going to happen, and it didn't need to be like, it's not, but I really appreciate that thought, that care, and it wasn't done under the table, was very much like these are the things. And so if you want to invest in the show, this is how this is going to be broken down, because we want to foster the growth of people of color producers and of like AAPI producers. This is not like a siloed experience anymore.
Totally. And it's like what was it, 22 of us? Like this production added 22 AAPI producers to the pool. And that means 22 avenues for new stories and new voices and new projects. And we say AAPI because, like, yes, the majority is Filipino, but there's, people like Bisham who are South Asian who came onto the team, and Anand, and like just all across the spectrum of people that have come on. So not just Filipinos. So I do want to be clear with our audience about that. It's like Filipinos were the largest AAPI demographic on this team, but we had other Asian people on the team as well, which was really awesome, and so it really pushed that point forward too. So
Bisham also represents the Indo-Caribbean representation, and then we had LaShawns, who's like such a powerhouse. Like it was really an experiment. And I like posted about this the other day, but like what was really special about Here Lies Love is it was an experiment, and I think a successful experiment for the most part, in what true partnership can look like.
Yeah. And coalition building, and like how do we do that in a Broadway community that wasn't really like that in the past. And it's like there's the superficial things that were first for the show that everybody saw, but there's so many more things that happened like behind the scenes in the producing part of it all that were also first, and also just an international, like binational partnership of getting not just investors, but sponsors and just community leaders from abroad to support this. And I feel like we all sit on each other's shoulders. So it's like Here Lies Love is just the next step in the longer journey of getting representation for our community. So
wholeheartedly agree.
Just like a stepping stone. And because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for K-pop, and K-pop wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Miss Saigon. Like it all makes sense, and the bigger the bigger view of the world, and looking back at whose shoulders we stand on. And so
I have to like shout out David Henry Hwang too in that, and like his writing of Yellowface and then Soft Power, and which it like had an amazing off-Broadway run too. Like these are all shows that talk about the nuance of what this diaspora is.
Right. And it's not trauma porn. Like these shows aren't trauma porn. They're like real stories about real people in most cases, and just about humans, like humans being human. Like it's not built up to be anything that it's fantastical. Like if you want to talk about Gilbert and Sullivan, yes. But like, now, Here Lies Love is people being people and being seduced by power, which is what happens to people, so.
Hey, this is JD from the Hyman Podcast, a place to have hard conversations revolving around the overall human experience. We tackle topics such as racism, the American justice system, and even headlining news such as the Alex Murdaugh saga. This season, we're going to continue to tackle more hard-hitting topics, and I'm excited to take you on that journey. The Hyman Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. The Hyman Podcast is produced in conjunction with the Hyman brand and is part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
We are excited to announce that we are joining the Press Play Podcast Network. The Krypton Report podcast is dedicated to all things Superman, Supergirl, and the planet Krypton. We discuss movies, TV, game, comics, and all things DC.
So join me, Tyler, with my co-host James and Georgina.
So join us as we explore DC's multiverse.
Look for Krypton Report on all social media platforms.
So given you've gone through gone through and are going through your first round about being a producer on a Broadway show, I ask all of my guests this on a scale of 1 to producer, 1 to 10. So 1 meaning not at all, 10 being I'm a producer, so 1 to producer. Where do you sit on that scale after this experience? And why? And obviously this is a floating answer. Like, it may be something today, but it could change, in another year. So
Yeah.
talk to us about that.
I am 1000% a producer, and I've been a producer for a very long time in my own artistic career. So I'm going to say like 10, I am a producer. I never really looked at it at that, but like whenever I was, I am a co-founder of my own diversity initiative. I co-produced all of like and during the pandemic, we did our own interview series called What's the Tea, which is on YouTube right now. We interviewed AAPI dancers, a different dancer for every day in the month of May. And that was hugely eye-opening. And to produce that, it was like a big amount of work for Phil and I. We were like, oh, we're just gonna have all these conversations. And then like the emotional lift of being like, oh my God, there are all these through lines of like different dancers who we all thought having different experiences, but it was the same within this microcosm of the ballet world. And so producing that, I've produced many of my own dancing gigs, from like finding like who's going to support, who's going to donate space, who's going to do the costumes, like how are we going to get there. I've always been one of those leaders when I've been on a gig to be like, oh, like for, I hate to say this, but a lot of my like dancing partners in the past, like it's predominant like that the women take care of the travel of the male dancers, and I'm like, you lift me, I'll take care of the. So it's like I've always been producing in one way or another. This is the first time that I've like produced money and got credit for producing, I believe. And so I think I very much still am that. And I am examining, like, I'm not sure where I fall on the spectrum of like the business of making money of producing. I also straddle this line that I'm so far away from being done with my artistic career as a dancer, as an actress, as a performer. In this gap year that I've had over the past year, in this experience, it has become more clear to me that, I am going to focus on my performing career and my acting career, and I will be producing the next iteration of what Swan Dive my book is, which hopefully will be exciting news I can release in the future. But like, I am a producer. That is something that I am. Am I a continuing Broadway producer? I would say yes, but I'm not a continuing Broadway producer in the sense of like, I'm going to produce a ton of shows each season to hedge my bets to make the most amount of money. I think where I sit, and I've had like a lot of time since like Tony nominations to now to really ruminate on my feelings and what I think and why Here Lies Love was so important, and why each of us, especially in the AAPI cohort of co-producers, and it wasn't just only us, there were other people, like Alexi, but like we put our whole heart and soul into the show, like above and beyond what the ask was. We could have easily like raised the money and walked away. And we didn't. And I'm not that kind of person. The projects that I choose to produce are going to be meaningful pieces of art that also talk about history and real life human experiences. I love the fact that this is something that I don't even think that Don Mike, you and I got to talk about before Here Lies Love closed. I was working on a school curriculum for Here Lies Love.
Oh, no, I didn't.
For it to be taught, for this to be taught, and how to to introduce, just such weird timing, introduce dissent to grade school kids, not just college kids, to talk about this and how important it is. And, I stand firmly in that belief that like we need to embrace our big brains in our head and to like take charge of learning information and know that like violence isn't the only answer.
Right. Yeah.
And so like the fact that this is a peaceful, the people power revolution was peaceful, is something I find is so important. And the fact that like this American history is not taught in schools. So like that is something that I am passionate about. And I think it's going that the rare shows that kind of embody all of that and do make it to Broadway. And, Broadway it's a changing beast right now. I think we need to truly examine the late stage capitalism of Broadway, for lack of a better term. I don't think that there should be a space in which there should be 15 shows. I think if in order for us to have new shows build audiences, they need time. And that needs to really be spoken about with not only like producers vying for the jobs, the competitiveness of producing, but also like with theater owners, that like it's not just a matter of collecting 20 million after 20 million after 20 million dollar,
Mhm.
capitalization. And I know that must sound like a wild number to our listeners, but like that is the average
Yes.
capitalization of a musical.
And
Um,
20 is under what we raised. Like, for us, it was 22. And then you
yeah,
have that are like 28 million. And it's like, okay, so we're raising all this money to close a show. It's like, so it's kind of like there's something that's not quite right in
yeah,
all
we've
of that.
lost the Broadway used to be a space for people to go and be inspired, and it used to not cost like, $300 a ticket. It used to be something that like was for the people of New York and not just tourists. And I still believe in it. But I think we truly, and we are tasked, we need to hold ourselves accountable as producers. We need to hold ourselves accountable as theater owners. We need to hold ourselves accountable as, stars and writers and, and musicians, everyone collectively. And like, how do we fix the problem? Because we all love it. It's like, we love it. And it's not working right now.
Mhm.
And I don't want to necessarily go to Broadway and see the same things that I can see on a movie screen.
Yeah,
Sometimes that works, and sometimes there's a place for, of course, there's a place for that, but there's also a place for like new and original stories. And we
mhm.
need to solve the problem of how to give enough time to generate and garner an audience. And these shows need to be supported in a better way.
I agree.
Um, that's my soapbox part of it.
Right. But I think there's also a world where like with new shows, like obviously they're not going to make as much money as say like the stage version of, and this is no shade to them, but like The Notebook. You know what I mean? It's like for things that are already well known, like Back to the Future, The Outsiders.
And
It's
those are
like they
hugely entertaining shows.
yeah,
It's not
and
to say
they've got
that.
that boost. Right. They're entertaining. They've got that boost of like the reputation. But, I think, in my opinion, like I feel like Broadway's afraid of, like, they're too afraid of the risk. Like they didn't used to be this afraid of the risk, but like they're so afraid of the risk that they're like, we're gonna choose something that is known already because of capitalism, right? And so, like with Here Lies Love, of course it was going to be a risk. Of course, it probably was not going to make as much money as a quote unquote regular Broadway show because it is new. And I think the community as a whole can take that risk of like, if we go into a season in the future where there are only as many shows in a season as there are theaters, and then, that makes revenue go down because a lot of the things will be new. That's a risk that we should try and take because it's going to lead to kind of resetting almost where it's like, okay, Broadway's in that place that you were just talking about, where it's like it is that place that inspires people, that brings new messages and new stories. But as long as we're stuck in this place of like, no, but we need to make money, we're going to go money first, capitalism first, then it's going to continue to turn into what Lea Salonga and I kind of talked about, which was the Disneyland of theater. It's almost like it's because of capitalism, we're squeezing out that space for the creativity part. That we're like, no, the money is more important right now. And granted, things in the world have happened, a pandemic. Yes, people are trying to recover, but there's a point where you have to ask, when you put on scale money versus art, influence versus profit, how, like, is it worth, like, what's worth more to us? The change that we're going to inspire in society, or the millions that we're going to make in that moment that's finite.
Another interesting point to talk about, and I was talking with Alexi about this, is like there is such a huge lack of diversity in the reviewing portion
Yeah.
of our community.
Yeah.
And the fact that reviews, for one reason or another, hold so much weight. And like, at the end of the day, that is
One
the
person's
opinion.
opinion.
It's an
Right.
opinion.
Yeah,
It's
it's one
it is
person.
not, it's like it, and I think that gets lost. And it has been lost because people want ease. You're looking around, and I think, God, I wish there's so many ways we could brainstorm. Like, I wish it was like a Broadway season pass, and you like got like discounted tickets, but like you can go to these shows, and it didn't cost you an arm and a leg, and you could like. I value the opinion of, the people who are going to see the shows, who are like you, like me,
Right.
like everyone else. I think like having more opportunity for that would
Yeah.
be in spaces where a lot of eyes see, and not just like, relegated to like an internet search. I think
Right.
like lifting voices and having voices that can disagree and have discourse. And like I've been having a ton of discourses about things this season, and like I hold space. I think that's what makes us wonderful as human beings is being able to have space for differing opinions.
I agree. And I think there's a world where journalistic standards, for some reason, stopped applying to critics. And I don't know where that happened and how that happened, but if we're going to call out a specific example, I won't say the name because this person doesn't deserve that airtime. But the review that came out about K-pop, that was like really kind of racist. And it's like, well, like where was the line in terms of critiquing a show? Because like I went to journalism school. I know that, what ethics are and how to speak in third person and all of that. But, you know, when did having an opinion allow you to circumvent the rules of being a journalist? Because that's what critics are. They're journalists with an opinion. So it's like, but where were you allowed to break that kind of standard of like show your opinion but don't attack the piece? But then there's also the other complicated part of like people believe the brand of a press outlet as opposed to knowing that that's one person's opinion. They're like, oh well, the New York Times said, it doesn't matter if it who said it, but because the New York Times said it, it's going to close the show. So that's kind of ponderings of life on my end. I'm not expecting an
Ponderings
answer.
of life, it's ponderings of like power and who gets to wield power and how power is like, I mean, that's essentially what it is when you have a platform like that. And like, as someone who has had a platform for
And you
very
still
many years, I feel like, and my platform shifts and keeps shifting, but like, I feel a responsibility to be thorough and to be open and to try to see every side. And I feel like sometimes, I mean, it's exactly what our play, exactly
right.
what this is about.
Yeah.
Power, power makes you do crazy things.
Yeah, for absolutely
Misguided
like
things.
and you're
And
like, oh,
so
I
this
have
is
this
who we
pen.
are. Yeah,
Right.
it's like this is the crux. At the end of the day, Here Lies Love is a show about a people who came together peacefully to stand up to power that was abusing.
Yeah.
It's abusing the platform. It broke the social contract. Not only that, but it murdered tens of thousands of people. It's like these are not gloried, like these are not wonderful people in any sense of the word. They're monsters. But our monsters are not all vampires and werewolves. Our monsters look like you and I.
Yeah, they look like us. Look, they're
That is the horror story of it all. I
yeah,
think about
the
it, like,
stealthiness of
should we have branded Here Lies Love as a political thriller? Like,
right. Like I would love to see the film version of our musical, like the movie, the feature film version. It would be a thriller, and like, yeah, it would.
but like that's the learning process of it
Yeah.
all. Like,
Mhm.
like if you really think about it, the story is terrifying.
It is because, and it's even more so terrifying because it happened. It's not like a thing that somebody like made up and was like, oh, like what if? It's like, no, no, this happened. Tens of thousands of people died in real life, in real time, and like the effects of it are still seen today. Like, it's still happening
And listen,
in society.
yeah, like Here Lies Love wasn't without its like faults. It still ultimately was a female woman's story told and written by men.
Right.
And
That too.
and
Mhm.
so uh, that's not perfect, but it did have an opportunity to star a woman of color on Broadway, like an AAPI woman on
Yes.
Broadway. And I think that is very powerful in itself. I can't wait for the time where we as a collective society are ready to embrace these stories of powerful women who are also terrible, that have
Yeah.
this same nuance and power that than the male characters have in all of our stories, the male protagonists, because I still feel like there is not an equality in being ready to accept the full breadth of a female experience of owning power and being terrible. Like we're not all Madonna, we're not all the whore. Like
Yeah.
it's and that is something that I feel decidedly we are not ready for. And I feel that sometimes in, reviews where there's aren't a lot of female perspectives. I'm like, you're missing a whole lens. And like how it would be so wonderful to have that voice present to like bounce off the opinions. And like that's something that like I'm so thankful for the collaboration and partnership that I have with Phil Chan, because like he has a lens that I can't possibly live in, and I don't have, and he does not have my lens, just as you don't have mine. And like I am committed to trying to understand and collect information from all of those lenses before I make a decision, or before I say anything publicly for,
Right.
that's the influence that is good. Before I use my influence, maybe that's a better way to do that. I'm
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
clear as many lenses as possible before I use influence.
And like being purposeful about your thought before it goes from an inside voice to an outside voice, and
And
like
that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
and it's a lot of emotional
Like,
work, and it lands us in trouble sometimes. And but we're human, we make mistakes. I think it's, if we can acknowledge the good and the bad with having a platform, I think that just makes us all the more powerful. And just in terms of the eye of DEI, like the inclusivity of it all, it's like how we can truly be inclusive by doing that, by trying to understand what the world looks like through other people's lenses. And I think that's what Here Lies Love was trying to do for other people who are non-Filipino. Like, and also, especially Americans, like being like, hey, like your history goes beyond George Washington. Like your history, on the other side of the world, you're like, Americans were still making American history, even though it may not look like what you thought it would be. It's what it was.
Welcome everyone to Podcast 616, the official podcast of Earth 616. I am your host, Damon Royster, and I am inviting you to listen and subscribe to this Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. On Podcast 616, we gather some of today's greatest comedians, writers, and actors to dive deep into all things Marvel, like comic book history and lore, all the interconnected superhero storylines, and of course, who's hot and who's not in the MCU. Honestly, why aren't you listening right now? You have the power to listen to Podcast 616. And as we always say, with great power comes even greater responsibility. Listen and subscribe to Podcast 616 wherever you get your podcasts.
In our last part of this episode, let's talk about kind of the future, and starting with the Tonys. So,
Okay.
we got our Tony noms, so pumped. We got 4 very well-deserved nominations for
Best
choreography,
score, choreography.
sound, set, and then best book. So that would be, for our colleagues in those departments. And, but we did not score a nom for best musical. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And you're kind of the first person that I'm talking about this from our cohort with. It's like Laura and I we were in like the midst of a show, so we didn't have time to like really sit down and talk about it. So like, how, from the perspective of being on our team and everything you were part of, how do you feel about that? And like, what does it mean? And like, for me, like, I know what I'd like to acknowledge in the results of that, because it's great that we have what we have. But, how are you feeling after we've learned how we're being acknowledged?
I am So thankful for the acknowledgement. I mean, we have not been closed as of like yesterday. We've been closed since October of last year. And the fact that like people have remembered this show, I think we've done the job. I had a colleague of mine from City Ballet text me. It was like, congratulations on your noms. He was
Yeah.
like, I think about Just Ask the Flowers and it makes me tear up. That song made a mark on my heart.
Hmm.
And it was another person of color from the company who's not Asian, but just like that just meant a lot. And like I I am going to be the first to admit that I'm a very competitive person. And I wanted the best musical nom, but I didn't want the best musical nom to be able to be like, I'm going to the Tonys. It's
Right.
no, it's for what it would have represented. And I think I need to reiterate again that like the heroes of Here Lies Love was always the people power revolution. It was
Yeah.
those they were the people, the Filipino people were the stars of that show. And that was, I believe, the red herring that
Hmm.
Alex Timber was talking about. This wasn't a show about Imelda at all. It
Right.
was a show about our collective ability as humans to rise up and make change peacefully. And it's a story about people of color. And I think what would have been amazing in acknowledgement, and we've been acknowledged by ARC, we've been acknowledged as a cohort, is like this incredible group of people all way round as co-producers that was so diverse.
Yeah.
Maybe particularly leaning towards like this incredible AAPI percentage that we have and the amount of AAPI people we had come in the doors. This wasn't just an AAPI show. Like to
Mhm.
be able to be recognized under the guise of best musical could have been cherry on top, but I think in my reflection of the past couple of days, I think we still have the cherry on top. I
I
don't think
agree.
I don't think we like listen, I'm not someone who's ever gotten awards and that sort of like, and it's not about the statue. It's not about the nomination would have helped, but our show's closed.
Yeah, right.
But
It wouldn't have sold tickets. The show's closed.
like, but what it has done, what we have done, what we have managed is that we have created this cohort, and this cohort still talks every single day. This
Yeah.
cohort,
Right.
like, we are bouncing ideas off each other. Like the partnership that we've created with our like white collaborators on the show continues, and I think that is so important and the biggest win. And I think if it's comes from us talking about that and being like, that's what's truly meaningful to me, that like, yeah, it would have been great to have that acknowledged. And the fact that it's like an international,
Yeah.
producing team that came together to make this happen, that would have been awesome. But that was not our reality. It's not my reality that I became a principal dancer with New York City Ballet, but I am reminded every day through the people that I work with that they're like, no, you are. No, you are a ballerina with a capital B. You've been that in the way
Yeah.
you act, in the way you support, in the way you stand up to power. You have done that. I think so. I think we are a cohort that have come together and we've already won the prize.
I agree. That's so beautiful. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's the fact that it doesn't matter, and I think I also said this in my post, it doesn't matter what we were nominated for. I think it matters that the community acknowledged our show at all. Like that they remembered us from back in the fall, that enough to say like we want to acknowledge in these categories. Not everybody can be acknowledged everywhere. It's like it doesn't matter what category, we're a Tony nominated show. That's the period. That's the bottom line. Like we are a Tony nominated show, and that's something. And we are all a Tony nominated team, regardless of what category it's in. And I think what to your point about partnerships and the cohort and our relationship as colleagues and friends is that like speaking for myself, like if it wasn't for Here Lies Love and if it wasn't for that experience, it wouldn't have opened the door to like all these other things that I'm a part of now. I think the show did so much for everybody, and it's not about the Tony, it's about the like what happened after we closed. Because it would be if it was like the show closed and we're all twiddling our thumbs on our sofas, then like yeah, we truly failed. But like the show opened all these doors for everybody. Everyone's collaborating. There's other work that's happening and like paths forward. It's
I
what you
mean,
said. We won already. We
I
won.
really want there to be a cast album still.
It's a wish and it's an aspiration. So,
I think it's gonna happen.
we want it. We want it. So in our minds, it's coming.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
I think that the way to like really talk about it is that like we are all artists.
yeah,
And we are all artists that switch between, like me, I switch between dancing and acting and producing, and you produce and you sing, you also act and sing and perform. And like we have these like facets, and like none of us, and I don't think any of us on this team, we're doing this for rewards. We're
no,
doing it for, and you can really see it when people start to make artistic choices in order for awards. At least
yeah,
I can smell it. Like
yeah.
I smell it. And this is like something that it was not a perfect show in any sense of the word, but my, was it a hell of a party.
Oh my God,
And it
it's so
was
fun.
and
It's the best.
the joy, the love that I have felt for, like, I walked by the theater the other day and the security and Vaughn came out, the security guard, and was like, "Oh my God, how are you? I miss you. What's going on?" Like, I
Yeah,
love that. I love that so much. I talked about it in my book when my first experience coming to Cats, and how like everyone in the entire building I love, and that's the best part of the community. That's the best part of Broadway. And none of us, getting back to my point, do this for awards. We do it for the
right.
community. And so we need to find a way to support the community so it can continue to thrive, because right now I feel like it's in danger of not thriving.
Yeah, because it's back to our point at the top of the show. Capitalism is creeping its way into sterilizing this culture because it's turning into money. It's less about the community that we're building and the people that we're connected to. It's about, well, what was your weekly take? What was your gross sales this week? Like the theater's like, well, can you keep paying our rent? All that stuff. And it's turning into a money game. And that's the part that I feel like we're all trying to actively fight against. So I do have hope for the future. I do know that there are people like us out there that are actively pushing to keep that keep that needle on this side about the community and the culture and the celebration of art on Broadway. And so with that said, like you know, what can your final statement be in this episode, at least, because you're definitely going to be back, trust and believe. But like in terms of like, if you had like words of hope to offer to people, because there are also just as worthy shows that didn't garner any nominations that were amazing, and people on Broadway who, yeah, and people who are on Broadway who, you know, didn't get any attention really as much as we have for a closed show, for open shows that they're in and part of. What kind of parting words can you offer to those people that are listening, and then also to people like you and me who, you know, are hoping to get here, and to play in this space and to be part of the change that can happen from your platform as our rogue ballerina? What can you offer them?
I think art is something, the process of art is something that should be respected and beloved, and is beloved by artists, but I also hope that it'll be beloved by the people who consume the art as well. Not just the product, but like the immense amount of creativity that happens to create a show, and that creativity is the gift to be able to fire on all those cylinders. I think that's why I love surrounding myself with artists, because we are constantly problem solving. We are scrappy. I think there is such hope for humanity and exploring humanity through art. And I don't want us to lose sight of that it is such a great outlet to dive and look into ourselves in a way that's not, not all of us can afford therapy every week, but we can afford to see ourselves. We can see change, and we can be inspired through what we see and what we go to see. And I think it's all of our responsibilities to make that reflection of what we're looking back resemble the diversity of the community that supports this art.
Yeah, that's awesome. And lastly, where can somebody find you? Well, first of all, they need to know, like, repeat for them your book, how they can read your book and learn about you there. But then where can they find you personally? If they're like, I like this woman, I want to, be in her Swan Lake and, just get together with her and talk producing and talk shop and, or just be her friend. Like, where can they find you?
I love it. Oh my God. So Swan Dive, The Making of a Rogue Ballerina is my memoir. It's available on all the things, but I truly support, like, Drama Bookshop has it. I always support small businesses.
Is
But
it an
where else?
audiobook?
Pardon?
Is it an audiobook?
It is an audiobook. If you want to spend 9 hours with me, yours truly, reading it. So, and I'm at Georgina _Pazcoguin on Instagram. I don't really use the other platforms all that much. I'm old, but I'm also, like, my art is visual. So, like, Instagram
Right.
makes sense for me as a dancer. And I'm going to be back on stage May 19th for Dance Against Cancer at New York City Center. It is an amazing cause. A bunch of dancers donate their time to raise money to fight another huge fight, which is cancer, which, we need that community. We need to support each other. We need to, there's so many people going through so much that we don't see. So I'm happy to be back on stage for that purpose. And then you'll see me on stage in DC and other projects that I'll be announcing soon.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Well, thank you again for your time today and sharing your story and talking about your thoughts. And it's always lovely chatting with you. And, like, I'm always so inspired when we talk about, like, just what we're doing and what we're involved with. Because, like I said, it's not done yet. Here Lies Love is still going. Like, stay tuned, folks. Like, there's more coming
live
down.
on. Your Lies Love is living on. Don't you worry. We are just
on a break.
rebooting. We're rebooting. But, like, I'm enough talk. When are we going drinking?
Soon. Like, definitely soon. Like, I'll be in New York. Sorry, audience. I'll be in New York in the week after your performance. So we'll get together.
Great. Amazing.
So much.
Priorities.
Priorities, exactly. Things, producers do.
Amelia,
For sure. All right. Well, thanks again.
I adore you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We're produced by Press Play Podcast, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a rating and a review, and send any ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, or to read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com.